I'm going to respond to a couple YouTube comments in this video. I don't know how many I'll get to. I don't do this very often. It's a lot of fun, though. I should do it more. And mainly there was one comment that was just so much fun to read, and there's so much to pick apart in it. I really just had to kind of respond to it in this way. So maybe the guy that made the comment is going to be like, oh, cool, he's responding to my comment. Or maybe he's going to think, oh, Peter's got so defensive about my comment, he must know that I'm right. I don't know. Anyways, I'm going to go through, basically there's a video I made, and the video is called Religious Zealousy. I made it very recently, and I gave a couple examples in the video of, like, one example of some guy who was really into some really obscure internet denomination of Christianity, and he was saying that all other Christians were going to go to hell, and he was posting many, many paragraphs about this on his Facebook constantly. Another example about, like, a family who gets into the Orthodox Church, gets extremely zealous, the parents, of course, and, like, starts throwing Orthodox rituals into every single conversation they have with, like, normal people in day-to-day life, and it's, like, really weird and, like, a schizophrenic level, and apparently those people don't usually stick around. They go super deep into it really fast, and then less than 2 years they're already moved on to some other denomination or church or something like that. So that's basically what the video is about. And I was saying extreme zealousy is cringe, right? So I got this comment by this guy, and let's go through it little by little. This 4 short paragraphs. So and each paragraph is just a couple sentences. So he says, I agree, it is very tiring to hear people on their religious rambles. I agree, it is tiring, right? Especially when it's clear they are seeing what they want to see. Of course. He says, it's so crucial to parcel all the details because the devil really is in the details. The well is poisoned, the pure water muddied. I agree conditionally. Obviously, it gets to a point where you're what's called pill pulling, which is I guess it's a Hebrew word. It's a Jewish word. It refers to, like, it originally would refer to, like, rabbis nitpicking about extremely obscure things that don't really matter, like, or high-level theologians spending years of their life debating these super fine points of really obscure theology that most lay people have never even heard of. So the argument that it could affect their everyday lives in some way is really a weak argument. But so yeah, I agree that devil's in the details. We got to pay attention to the details, but I also think that can really swing back the other way hard and really get you, So going on, he says, and this is where the fun stuff starts. By the way, this guy's username is M. Anthony Chavez, right? So this is the guy, the man himself. It's a very good comment, and I'm just kind of picking it apart and looking at what there is to be looked at. So he says, I won't name names here, but all the denominations are false. Religious spirit is wicked. I don't know what he means by religious spirit is wicked. That's just I don't know. It's a weird thing to say. But, okay, so all the denominations are false. So and then later on he mentions Jesus. So if you're a Christian or you believe in Jesus, whatnot, but you say all the denominations are false, that means you're non-denominational. That's referred to as a non-denominational Christian. Now, what I've noticed about non-denominational Christians is they often are denominational. They just don't want to admit to it, and it's usually some obscure denominations they found on the internet. As we'll see later in the comment, the guy is repeating phrases and teachings that he's learned from certain movements, certain internet Christian movements. So to say that all denominations are false, but then profess that you believe in certain denominations without naming them is kind of weird. But the other thing about saying that all denominations are false, we're assuming this guy believes in Jesus because he mentions later on in the comment that he does. So he's a Christian, but he's not denominational, right? But he says all the denominations are false. What about the denomination, or shall we say the church? What about the church that Jesus started, right? Because he may not be familiar with ancient Christian history, which actually they don't seem to even teach this in Sunday schools anymore in Protestant churches, but a very, very long time ago, before Jesus died, he gave instructions to the apostles, and this is in the Bible, and he told them to start a church and spread the gospel far and wide. So they did that. After he died, the apostles traveled around and they spread the gospel or the teachings of Christianity, and And all of them except for I think one, were eventually killed in horrific ways because they refused to, submit to some pagan faith somewhere. That's what I made those funny videos joking about Christians killing pagans and pagans killing Christians. That was all going on. Pagans killed Christians for a few hundred years, and then Christians killed pagans for hundreds of years more. So, anyways, so Jesus told the apostles to start a church, right? And they did, right? So that was Christianity. That was early Christianity. They didn't even have the New Testament back then, so people are a bit confused when they say, "Oh, I don't follow any of the tradition. I only follow what's written in the Bible." When the Bible wasn't even written in the days of early Christianity, and it was only tradition and oral tradition. So you'd say all the denominations are false. You're necessarily including the quote-unquote denomination, the church that Jesus started, which obviously is a blasphemy if you're a person that believes in Jesus, and then you say, "Oh, all the denominations are false." So he would have to qualify that by saying all denominations are false except for the church that Jesus started, which doesn't exist anymore today, except that it does. There was one church until 1054, and then it split into two churches: the Orthodox, the Eastern Church, and the Western Church. So the Eastern Church is like they call it Eastern Orthodox. It's a collection of jurisdictions from the Russian Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Serbian Orthodox Church. Got to give a shout out to my Slav bros out there, and then my Balkan bros, and then there's of course the Western Church was the Roman Catholic Church, right? So it's kind of like a hard fork of a cryptocurrency. Like which one was the Bitcoin, which one was the Bitcoin Cash? Now, at this point, a non-denominational Christian is going to say, yeah, but by that point all the traditions were completely lost. There wasn't anything like early Christianity. Well, we have writings from the early days of Christianity, so we can find out which of those denominations is closer to early Christianity. And of course it was, biased me is going to say, of course, it was the Orthodox Church, but I think there's a lot of evidence showing that as well, and including actually comparing the Orthodox Church today to the writings from the Church Fathers and what we know of the Apostles and the early church services. And then, of course, in around 1500, we had Martin Luther, we had the Protestant Reformation, and a whole bunch of denominations popped up out of nowhere, and that's when all these crazy ideas started coming out. So even as saying something like all the denominations are false denominations, which he misspelled dominations, maybe on purpose, maybe it's one of those cutesy things, but not something that I would say. And then continuing on. He says, it's about walking as Yahusha walked, having the same works as he did, right? Who is Yahusha? Well, Yahusha is a name that some people use to refer to who we call in English Jesus. So we call him Jesus Christ. His name back in the day, when he lived, was Yeshua ben David of Nazareth, except saying that in ancient Aramaic or Hebrew, whatever. And so just calling him Yahusha right away shows that he is into some type of internet denomination, because there are these websites, there's the Hebrew Roots movement, there's the Sacred Name movement, there's various denominations, shall we say, that insist that you will only be saved, or you will have, they even sometimes say that you will have like special spiritual powers, or you'll be saved easier or something like that if you use what they consider to be the correct name for Jesus. Now let's go into this a little bit, because hey, this is going to be kind of a long video. It's not really even a video, it's just kind of a podcast, but I'm going to go into a little bit of detail here because I'm not trying to make this video really short, as I usually would be doing. So let's look into some examples of this. So like I said, there's a lot to unpack here. So I pulled up the Wikipedia article on Yahshua, not even Yahusha, but Yahshua. And hey guys, Wikipedia, I know, all right? I know, all right? So, don't even go there, right? I know, right? But anyways, it says, Yahshua, not to be confused with Yahshua, which is another spelling with an H at the end. So there's another name movement with a slightly different spelling. Anyway, and we're not even on the one that this guy says in my YouTube comment. He says, in the article it says Yahshua is a proposed transliteration of, then it gives some ancient Hebrew characters, which is the original Hebrew name of Jesus. The pronunciation Yahshua is philologically impossible in the original Hebrew and has support neither in archaeological findings such as the Dead Sea Scrolls or inscriptions, nor in rabbinical texts as a form of Joshua. Scholarship generally considers the original form of Jesus to be Yeshua, a Hebrew, I was reading Hebrew and Bible at the same time, a Hebrew Bible form of Joshua. Usage and or support of the name Yahshua is largely restricted to religious groups that are a part of or otherwise associated with the sacred name and Hebrew roots movements, which, among other things, advocate for the preservation of Hebrew sacred names in translation to the Bible, and that's where I'm ending my Wikipedia reading for the day. And so, obviously, those movements are... here's the thing. Hebrew was a dead language, right? It only existed in written form. It was revived in the 1900s with the people who started the modern nation state, the modern state of Israel, right? They brought spoken Hebrew back from the dead, but they had no idea how it was spoken. They just invented it, right? So even calling it like, we have an article on the Hebrew language and on the revival of the Hebrew language, right? Took place in Europe in the southern Levant region toward the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century. So it changed from basically a dead language to a spoken and written language used for daily life in Israel, right? So they purposely brought the dead spoken Hebrew back from the dead. Before that, it was just written, right? And it says, is the only successful large-scale example of linguistic revival. I don't consider it to be successful because we don't know how it was spoken back then. But anyways, so when we're talking about differences between Yahshua and Yahshua with an H at the end, and Yeshua and Yahusha and some of those other versions, it's pill pulling, plain and simple. It's spending a good portion of your life devoted to uncovering some extremely irrelevant details. Let's move on. Also here it says, the English, Jesus. In Spanish they say Jesus. Are they going to go to hell for saying Jesus? Are we going to go to hell for saying Jesus? Right? The English Jesus is a transliteration of the Greek, which I can't pronounce the Greek word correctly, right? It says like Jesus. In translations of the Hebrew Bible into ancient Greek, Jesus was used to represent the Hebrew/Aramaic name Yeshua, a derivation of the earlier Hebrew Yehoshua, so there is another one, right, or Joshua. Both names mean Yah saves. So as long as you're using something that means Yah saves in some language, you're good, right? As a result, it is a commonly accepted fact within academia that Jesus' native Hebrew/Aramaic name was Yeshua. Now, people are going to say, "Oh, well, academia, they're just purposely giving us the wrong name of Jesus so that we all go to hell for using Jesus' name wrong." Keep in mind that academia has also maintained, like, when people say that, like, your atheist nihilist Redditor friends say on Facebook or whatever that, "Oh, well, historians agree that Jesus wasn't even a real historical character." Historical figure, he didn't even exist. If you look that up, you'll find it's completely wrong, right? Virtually all ancient scholars of ancient history, virtually unanimously agree that Jesus did actually exist. There are numerous references to him. There's letters written about him by Pontius Pilate and Gamaliel and other historical figures in the Roman Empire. So they made that up completely. So don't, just because you're traumatized by certain things you learned in school being incorrect, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and disbelieve every single thing you read ever, right? Because ancient scholars actually did get a lot of things right. They got a lot of things wrong, but they got a lot of things right too. And they're pretty sure that his native Hebrew/Aramaic name was Yeshua. If you go to the Yahusha one of the Yahusha websites, right, Sefer Publishing Group, which is, again, just another denomination of Christianity, because they feel it's really important to use, right, Yahusha HaMashiach, the Messiah's real name. Have you ever wondered what is Jesus' real name? What was he called during the time when he was here on earth? No, I haven't wondered, because his real name was Yeshua. But anyways, so if we directly translated that into English, we'd be calling him Joshua today. But we didn't. It was translated into Greek and then English. So we call him Jesus. Anyways, that's all fine, right? What if I told you that the Greek name was Iesus? I'm reading from this website. And the name found in the 1535 Coverdale Bible, the 1560 Geneva Bible, and the 1611 King blah, blah, blah. So it goes on and gives all these examples. And then it talks about all the Hebrew names of people in the Bible. It talks about how weird it would be if a Hebrew child was given a Greek name. It says, hold on, where does it talk about? Oh yeah, it says, he'd given them a Greek name for a child who had come to sit on the throne of David, who is a direct descendant of, and then it lists the supposed Englishified spelling, the Anglified spellings of supposed ancient Hebrew names, right? Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Well, you guys don't know how any of those words were pronounced anyways, and you're making up that Englishified spelling. This is such a modern movement, it's funny. So I'm not going to read any further from this website, but just goes to show there's a whole bunch of slight variations on Jesus' name, and there's a whole bunch of movements of people claiming you have to use that name. Anyways, I had all these other articles pulled up about the Canaanite migration into the Levant from North Africa or the Arabian Peninsula, and the Caucasian migrations from the Caucasus Mountains into the Levant. So we're talking 3,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago, and then Abraham was born 2000 BC. No, I said years ago, I meant BC, I'm sorry. So between 3,800 and 3,300 BC, the Canaanites showed up in the Levant. And then supposedly around 3000 BC, there was a large movement of Caucasian groups from the southern Caucasus region into the Levant around 3000 BC, and then Abraham was born 2000 BC roughly. And I think one of the reasons that the culture of the Caucasians that lived in that region resulted in all this ancient tradition and eventually written tradition much sooner than the cultures of the same racial group of Caucasians that were living in Europe during that time, who ended up without much written language, without much oral tradition. It's commonly said that the Romans wrote down all of the history of the Northern Europeans that they found when they got there, or something like that. I know I'm extremely oversimplifying everything, but basically you had these sort of much more advanced teachings and moral code and system, and much more formalized and codified. There's a reason that we have the Old Testament detailing all the family bloodlines of these groups, of these Caucasian groups that lived in the Levant during that time, from 2000 BC to 0, because I think they had a lot more pressure than the groups, than their cousins in the rest of Europe, because in that region you have, when I was reading about the history of the migrations and stuff, you had small groups of people that migrated from the Caucasus living as minority populations in a region that was heavily inhabited by Arabs, who are mostly the Canaanites that came from the Arabian Peninsula. So when you're in that type of situation, and you're trying to keep your tribe, and you're trying to keep your traditions, and maybe your neighbors are sacrificing babies to Moloch, that's one of the reasons that, Abraham's family line and the tribes of the Israelites became such a strong unit with such strong traditions, because they had a lot more pressure. And that's also why I theorize, right, my amateur theorizations, I theorize that the Southern Europeans basically invented modern civilization and governments, whereas the Northern Europeans at the time were still living in mud huts. And yeah, they had complicated technology and things like that, for the time, but in terms of centralization, organization, modern civilization, and crazy architecture, the Romans and the Greeks did that much better, right? They were much more advanced than the Northern Europeans at the time, and I think the reason, again, is because the Romans and the Greeks and the Caucasian populations in the Levant, they were under a lot more pressure, right? Because there was Arabs and North Africans around everywhere, right? They were basically butting up against these other races of people, right? And there was more conflict there. Whereas in Europe, yes, there was the Mongols and there were invasions and things, but it was much less. They weren't living right surrounded by these people on a day-to-day basis, right? So I think that sort of intercultural pressure resulted in government and civilization being invented by the Southern Europeans versus Northern, and basically the entire Christian religion being developed by the populations in the Levant. So, sorry to go off on a tangent there. I know I was responding to a YouTube comment, but that's some of the other things I had pulled up here, which are interesting to note, because a lot of people don't even realize, or they think everybody, they think everybody in that region was Arabic, and that's not true at all. And that's why in the Bible it mentions, for example, it's written in the Bible that, well, the Protestants removed some books of the Bible, but we're going to ignore that for now. So it mentions that Noah had white skin, right? It mentions that Noah was white. It refers to the Nazarenes, or the people from Nazareth, which is the town where Jesus was born. It refers to them being white as snow. And the reason for that is that it was just a description of them, right? That's just who they were. They were Caucasian people. There's nothing wrong with migrating from the Caucasus Mountains and you have white skin, right? You migrate from the Arabian Peninsula and you have olive-colored or darker or brown skin. That's just how it is, right? So they didn't say that because Noah was albino. For some reason they start teaching that recently. They're like, Noah. In the Bible it says Noah was white because he was albino, right? They don't give any. I don't even think they talk about the Book of Lamentations where it talks about the Nazarenes. I think they just ignore that. But anyways. Moving back, the next cool thing this guy said in this comment, right? Because there's the huge thing. So obviously he's into the Hebrew roots thing, or one of those movements. I don't know exactly which one. He says also, okay, so he mentions that it's about, so he's talking about what, I don't know what it is, but he says it's about walking as Yahushua walked, having the same works as he did. And he says this includes not exploiting animals. All right, I'm going to skip that for now. He says also, studying things for oneself because he who trusts in man is cursed. So, again, this is a double-edged sword. Just like the devil is in the details, right? This is a double-edged sword, because most people will study for things for themselves and just get it all wrong, right? So that's difficult. On the other hand, I agree that people should study things for themselves, because imagine if you just believed everything that mainstream culture told you. So it's just a big double-edged sword, right? Moving on, it says, he says, repentant experiences like going vegan, which he parenthesizes as garden diet, are required to understand the depth of one's misperceptions. Okay, so first of all, this repentant experiences, he actually uses that expression later, and I was trying to find out where that comes from, because people don't just use expressions like that without having it come from somewhere. And looking on the internet, it looks like it's an expression commonly used in like born again / evangelical circles, although it's not really clear. But anyways, people say they're not denominational, all denominations are evil, but then they'll use expressions like that where obviously they're coming from somewhere with that. Read it on some internet article. So anyways, interestingly, I'm sure this man would be very interested and happy to know that there actually are a number of denominations, shall we say, of Christianity that do things like this from time to time. For example, in Orthodoxy, there's fasts throughout the year. There's a fast and feast cycle. So for certain times of the year, you're basically eternally living out the calendar cycle of historical events in Christianity. So throughout the year, they'll be like, okay, well, this is a fast for however many days. You can't consume any meat or certain other things during this period. So, but this guy in my comment appears to be suggesting that you have to actually just permanently adopt a vegan diet, which I'm not really going to respond to that. It's just not. I know vegans tend to look in the Bible and find a bunch of verses that claim to support them, and there was a whole documentary recently made called like Christ. What is it called? I'm trying to find what it was called. Christspiracy. So it's basically they're just making up a whole bunch of stuff in that documentary. Didn't Jesus eat fish? This new vegan documentary, right? So obviously that's coming from somewhere, and that somewhere that it's coming from is just not a good source for information on early Christianity. So, anyways, he says, continuing in this YouTube comment, there are lots of factors that affect one's perspective, including eating flesh or not. So this is kind of a thing where it's implying that if somebody is eating meat, that their perspective is going to be wrong, and if they're not, their perspective is going to be right. I would just say that, like, because of what I did before, I've met obviously hundreds and hundreds of vegans, and the rate of mental illness and delusion is so high in that community, and the people are so unhealthy by and large. it's just not something I'm even going to consider that's a valid, like that in itself is not really a valid perspective. So I just found it to be wrong, that's all. Like, I used to think correctly. I used to agree with this guy 100%, but after years of experience dealing with all those people, I realized that it's just not correct. It just doesn't match up with reality. And then he says, I would recommend you look into Bates method / sun gazing for a new repentant experience for yourself. Again, there's this repentant experience phrase. So, but yeah, so I do know about the Bates method and sun gazing and things like that for, well, especially the Bates method and similar methods for restoring your eyesight and not using glasses. I've known about that for many years. I just haven't done it. I have many priorities in my life, and I actually don't mind having glasses. He says, human bodies are meant to work a lot better than most have been led to believe. I agree. The thing is, I've noticed some people who are really into this, me having glasses bothers them more than it bothers me, right? If I really was bothered by having glasses and really intent on healing my vision, I would do so, because I know those exercises and different methods that you're supposed to use, including nutrition, because there are nutrition issues as well relating to eyesight. So I would have done that if I really cared that much. But like I said, usually people who, like, he mentions this again at the end in a really, like, in a way that obviously makes it really clear that me having glasses bothers him a lot more than it bothers me, right? He says, you could probably leave off the lenses with a new eye care routine. Yes, that's correct. Furthermore, he says, I would say that all the IQ and mental health talk is largely cut from the same cloth as the pharmakeia cult of death. It helps some people to cope with a false system. There should be no peace at all, really, in a world that perversely abuses animals. Well, first of all, I am against the perverse abuse of animals, but the funny thing about this comment is, first of all, it falsely conflates the IQ and mental health talk with the pharmakeia cult of death, which I'm not talking about mental health from a perspective of we need to drug people who are mentally ill. I'm talking about that it does exist. There are people who, this guy may have not met people like this, but when you meet someone with dementia, schizophrenia, things like that, yes, they have largely nutritional causes. So I'm not saying that they're not caused by things that these people did wrong in their lives, right? There's usually a combination of trauma and poor nutrition, because, hey, there are people who experience trauma but that don't really get mentally ill from it. And then there are people who experience trauma and become extremely mentally ill their entire life. So nutrition is like the hidden factor that most people don't know about. So if you experience trauma and you have somewhat poor nutrition, which most people wouldn't realize if they did have, then you would okay, so you have symptoms like, for example, compulsive liar, or a compulsive talker, somebody who talks nonstop and you just can't get them to stop rambling on, or dementia, full-blown schizophrenia, all that kind of stuff, paranoid, people who are really anxious all the time, right? And those things exist, so there's no way you can say that doesn't exist. But he says, I've heard vegans say this before, he says there's no peace at all really in a world that perversely abuses animals. So he's basically blaming all mental health problems on the fact that people abuse animals, and it's just, it's a very undeveloped understanding of how things all fit together, right? And then furthermore, going back to the glasses thing, at the end he says, and this is just great, he says, consider my words in the context that I judge you a bit for speaking of pharmakeia while wearing glasses, which is almost always the sign of someone who doesn't investigate first principles. Bam! Right? He really got me there, didn't he? I've totally been had. So, great. So again, I wasn't speaking of pharmakeia. He was just falsely conflating pharmakeia with the concept of like drugging and masking symptoms and stuff. With mental illness does exist. There are people who are just crazy, right? They are just crazy, and yes, that's caused by a combination of trauma and nutrition, trauma and poor nutrition, and the glasses thing. So again, we are being shown that me having glasses bothers him a huge amount, right? And then he's clearly saying that he's judging me for having glasses and that I don't investigate for principles. I have probably known about the Bates method for far longer than this guy has. I don't know how old he is, right? But, I've known about that for a very long time. I even started doing the exercises for a while. Like I said, I have other priorities, and that bothers him so much, and that's great. So I thought, I was like, I could give a nice response to this. I could type out all this stuff, respond to every single little point, but I'm not going to. I just left one comment that I said, I will pray for you, bro. Because it's like, obviously he's got some misconceptions, he's really stuck on certain ideas, like the garden diet, and he probably believes that Jesus was vegan, and he really is into like the sacred name movement and some denominations of Christianity, despite saying all denominations are false. He thinks that mental illnesses don't really exist yet. They obviously do. It's doing false conflations and straw manning, right? So that's all there. So I guess the appropriate response is just to say like, I hope you find help, right? So that's what I said, right? And the funniest response that really just sums up all the like weird negative things that he was putting off in the first comment, he responds and says, after researching you a bit, Peter, not sure that I would want it, right? Of course, because non-denominationalists are allergic to prayer. If somebody wants to pray for them they don't like, they bristle up at the idea. So that's kind of funny. It's like when you tell a liberal that you're going to pray for them, they get so triggered by that, right? He says, I appreciate the sarcasm. Well, that wasn't sarcastic at all. So this guy's not really very good at reading me. He says, I look forward to seeing you without glasses. I don't think you're ever going to see me without glasses, buddy, unless I take them off. Sorry if that... And okay, so he says, I look forward to seeing you without glasses or bashing sun gazing, whichever comes first, right? So he assumes that I don't know about the base method or any ways of reversing myopia. So he's just so into that. It's going to blow his mind. It's going to rock his world when he finds out that I actually know about it, that I've actually heard about it before, and it'll bother him so much that I've known about it for many, many years and haven't done it. That's going to bother him even more, and he's going to judge me and say, well, you don't prioritize your eyes. Like, all right, buddy, fine, right? So this is great. So look forward to seeing you without glasses or bashing sun gazing, whichever comes first, right? So I'm either going to do, in his mind, I'm either going to do the Bates method or I'm going to be against it. There's no possibility that I could support it and agree with it and have known about it for many years and simply not do it because whatever, right? That's not a possibility in his mind. So there's no nuance. So this guy needs to learn nuance. He needs to be able to accept a paradox. He needs to be able to learn what theological concepts are not worth beating like a dead horse. That's all. I'm going to go on to another little comment that I got. Let's see where it is. I made a video called Pagans versus Christians, Holy War. And so I made a short series of videos. Maybe I'll make some more, right? Like Pagans versus Christians 2, right? So it's kind of like I'll joke about, I made some jokes about Christians killing pagans, and then some guy got really offended. He even said he like wouldn't feel safe with his family around somebody who makes, even though it's a joke, like makes inappropriate jokes like that, which whatever. And then so I made a video joking about pagans killing Christians, which of course also happened. And they tortured Christians in horrible ways and whatnot. So like, there is a lot of that back and forth back in ancient history, and it happened a long time ago, so I'm joking about it. Sorry if that offends anybody. So anyways, that was the video. And so somebody responds, we were talking, I think in the comment section about, I think people were talking about the Catholic and the Orthodox Church and all that and corruption in the churches. So somebody responds and says, okay, they're more liberal at the moment. The Greek Orthodox have hierarchical problems. Says, but I listen to some Orthodox, they talk about Eastern European style corruption among priests constantly. In other words, bribes for blessings, bribes to marry you, or anything else they can think of. Also that most of the older ones were involved with state intelligence back in the day. Of course, this isn't a redemption of the Catholics. They are willing to fall into heresy for the sake of their corruption, but none of the denominations are in the best state and have all declined considerably from their past. I would be happy with medieval Catholics just as I would be happy with 19th century Orthodox, but they both aren't that and were that if it makes sense. Corruption now does not mean they were not good in the past, but being good in the past does not save them now. All right, very good points. So I would say this just reminds us, again, that the church does exist in the world. Right? And the church does not exist in a bubble by itself, not affected by the world. It's impossible to have the church. And the church is made up of people in the world, and made up of priests and bishops and whatnot and patriarchs that live in the world, right? And so if the world is more corrupt right now, then probably all the churches are going to be more corrupt. That's why it's important to see which churches are resisting the corruption the most, and I still will hold to my belief that the Orthodox Church is doing that and also holding strong to ancient tradition, right? As we learn, ancient tradition is actually pretty important. So regarding the corruption he mentions, or she, I don't know the gender identity of this person. So the corruption among Eastern European priests, so that apparently that's a thing. And then not all priests are perfect, believe it or not. And they mentioned most of the older ones were involved in state intelligence. So we're talking about communists. We're talking about priests. We're talking about basically priests, bishops, patriarchs, etc., being pulled into the KGB and other state intelligence apparatus during the period of the Soviet Union. And so let's look. I'm going to see if I can find something really quickly that I think I had saved. It is something about the Bolsheviks. Let's see, where is this? All right, so according to various books about the subject, 95% of the central government of the Bolshevik central government were ethnically Jewish. 92% of the main Gulag commanders, 78% of the commissars, 50% of the generals in the NKVD, 40% of the high-ranking officers in the Soviet secret police, 38.5% of the senior posts in the Soviet security apparatus. So when we're talking about the Russian Revolution and its eventual effect on the Orthodox Church, the Russian Revolution was not Russian at all. It was a Jewish revolution, and so basically we have a situation where a group that's largely consisting of high-ranking Jewish officials led this revolution and formed the Soviet Union. And so it makes sense, following from that, since so many of these Bolshevik officials were ethnically Jewish, it makes sense that, as you know, Jews and Christians haven't exactly gotten along throughout history, right? In fact, there's pretty much a 2,000-plus year animosity, as you may remember from previous postings on the subject. The modern Jews, the Khazarian origin theory is pretty much not true. There is some truth to it, but in general, on an average basis, the modern day Jew is descended from the Edomites in the Bible, which were one of the groups. King Herod was an Edomite, for example, and the Edomites. And remember that genetic study that I posted in my Telegram channel a while back, showing, basically concluding very clearly that the Arabic or the Middle Eastern component of the DNA of a modern day ethnic Jew is descended from the Canaanites, right? And the reason for that, well, the Edomites were basically Canaanites with Israelite admixture, right? They descended from Esau, who took Canaanite wives, and other people did as well. Judah took a Canaanite wife, and from Esau all the way up to Cain, basically, you have a situation where in the Bible there's many different ethnic groups. The Israelites were one of them, right? The Canaanites were another. The Canaanites were Arab. When you had Canaanites intermarrying with Israelites over generations, that resulted in this group that were called the Edomites, or that descended from Esau, and so the modern day Jews descend from Esau. Just to kind of explain some of the historical animosity, and they were fighting even in biblical times, right? So now it should make a little bit more sense when I talk about this. And of course, one of the things that the Soviet Union was known to do was to persecute the church, right? Many priests were killed. So if you're a priest or a bishop or a patriarch and you're living in the Soviet Union, you have some choices, right? You might decide, hey, I'm going to leave and I'm going to go outside of Russia. And hey, now I'm outside of Russia, so maybe I'm going to start the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, and maybe I'll call it that. All right, that's a great idea. So some of them did exactly that. They left Russia, and at some point there was a church started called the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, right? And so it says here, the ROCOR was established in the early 1920s as a de facto independent ecclesiastical jurisdiction of Eastern Orthodoxy, initially due to lack of regular liaison between the Central Church Authority in Moscow and some bishops due to their voluntary exile after the Russian Civil War. These bishops migrated with other Russians to Western European cities and nations, including Paris and other parts of France, and to the United States and other Western countries. Later, these bishops rejected the Moscow Patriarchate's unconditional political loyalty to the Bolshevik regime in the USSR, so of course, Sometimes, if you were a priest, bishop, or archbishop, or patriarch in the Soviet Union, maybe you won't flee, maybe you'll decide to martyr yourself and get killed, right? So let me Google something. Russian priests killed by the Soviet Union. I'm just trying to see what they say. During the purges of 1937 and 1938, church documents record that 168,000 Russian Orthodox clergy were arrested. Of these, over 100,000 were shot. Lower estimates claim that at least 25 to 30,000 clergy were killed in the 1930s and 40s. So, so there's ethnic and religious strife going on here. So we have a revolution that was largely led and that resulted in a government that was largely led by one ethno-religious group. So of course they are going to start killing people of the other ethno-religious group. That's just how things work, folks. Sorry to break it to you. That just happens everywhere around the world over and over again throughout history. Another article, persecution of Christians in the Soviet Union. So of course, that's just what happens. So you might flee Russia and start something called the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. Or you might stay in Russia and be killed, right? Martyr yourself, be martyred for your faith. Or you might stay in Russia and collude with the Soviet Union, the Bolsheviks, the KGB, whatever, because you may also think, okay, well, they will kill every single one of us and burn down all the churches. So maybe if I do this, then we can at least keep the church alive here and keep the faith going and da-da-da-da-da, right? So who am I to sit here 100 years later, or 80 years later, 70 years later, and say that what they did was wrong? They should have only done this, right? They should have only fled and all just started the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. Or they and just abandoned all the Russian people. Or they should have all allowed themselves to be martyred, right? Or they should have all colluded. I don't know. They all decided to do different things, and that's why you have, of course, as this person says in their comment, back to the YouTube comment, of course, they say also that most of the older ones were involved with state intelligence back in the day. Yes, and again, the church it exists in the world, so it's affected by the world, so we're going to see that, right? So regarding small-scale corruption like bribes for blessings or for marriages and things like that, yeah, again, not everybody who is a priest is perfect, and that's unfortunate. So again, obviously my biased opinion is still that there is much. I think this can be supported with empirical example and fact and statistic. Is that the Orthodox Church is just a lot less corrupt than the Catholic Church has become, but that's not to say that there's not plenty of corruption in both those churches, which again are huge institutions with millions of people around the world. So, anyways, I might as well, since this is already a long video, I might as well look at this other video that I made, which is called, let's see if I can find it. It's called Racism. So I made a video called Racism, because I was like, how could I be the most controversial ever possible, but without getting banned from YouTube? And I made a video, and of course, it didn't get banned from YouTube, because YouTube loves me. And it's called Racism. I've got over 400 views so far. I forget exactly what I talked about in this video. It wasn't really that controversial, actually. Sorry, guys. You're probably expecting something a lot more hot and spicy than what it actually was. But it wasn't a clickbait title. I really did talk about racism in the video. So this person, yes, Dr. Drungus3167 says, the title tells me it's going to be a great video. Well, it was a great video, so thanks. Follower of the train 6336 says racism is nothing more than making an educated guess based on patterns, which is an advantageous ability to have an evolution. Well, that's a very big-brained 211 IQ Chris Langan to your answer. Cool. So here now we get some people who are actually offended. Well, I don't understand why they got offended by this video, but Rashid Ghazi says racism isn't really that bad when you aren't affected by it. This must be a pep talk for racist. I don't think you watched the video. What else? Yes, user EU5UW9HE3Y. Why don't you have a real username? Says, you defending the racism, and that makes you racist, dude. What? I guess. I don't know. And then Mary, US8JB. What is with all these people with like Reddit throwaway style usernames? Says, within the first minute no less. Within the first minute, I didn't even get to that subject in the first minute. There was no defending of anything within the first minute. So I think all that happened was Mary US8JB hit the play button on the video and was instantly triggered, and her body was just filled with triggeredness. And that's why she just felt that I was defending racism within the first minute of the video. I was talking about racism in the video. I certainly talked about it quite a bit. It was a great video. So, intellectual embargo. A very high IQ man who I had the pleasure of meeting a couple weeks ago. Really a big-brained dude. He says, racism as a term needs to be dealt with. As you point out, the term is used as a bludgeon against white people. Yeah, and then he talks a little bit about the strategy and things like that. And he says, you suggest setting up your own racial views on a spectrum with genocide. I don't know, a lot of what I say is tongue-in-cheek also, so I always hope people don't take it too seriously, but then I also hope they do, so that way they argue in my comment section. But he says you should not make the difference between your views and genocide as a matter of degrees rather than categorically incompatible. Yes, maybe. Maybe. I mean, genocide is a great human tradition, but I generally don't think we should engage in it. So it's just something that just happens, right? Genocide is a low IQ tactic that the higher echelons of society can often not stop from happening. It's people get to a point where they see the violence as the only answer, and then they engage in violence. So us high IQ guys could debate on YouTube all day long about genocide and whether we should be categorically incompatible with it or degrees of separation. And in the end, if the people with 2 GG IQs are going to start killing everyone, they're just going to do that, and we're just going to sit around and debate it all day. So that's kind of my view on that. Huayo Wang Jiang, I can't pronounce this username, says, white American here, lived in China, traveled around Asia, Africa, etc., experienced all kinds of quote terrible racism or whatever, profiling, racial slurs, refusal to rent to me from landlords, etc. Not a big deal, actually. Every group is racist, and that's perfectly fine. Americans are completely brainwashed by quote unquote ADL, right? So let's see the ADL. Let's go to the ADL's website, because he mentions the ADL. ADL. It's a great organization. ADL fights all forms of anti-Semitism and bias, using innovation and partnerships to drive impact. A global leader in combating anti-Semitism. Everyone knows about the ATL. The ADL. Just a funny organization. There's this definition on. Remember I was mentioning Wikipedia before. If you look at the. Like, I was Googling something unrelated, like migrations of different groups of people around Europe and the Near East during thousands of years ago. And Wikipedia pops up this side panel in their search bar, and it says, Caucasian race. The Caucasian race is an obsolete racial classification of humans based on a now disproven theory of biological race. Wikipedia, right? Come on. Biological race has not been disproven, right? But we're in the day and age where some authority can say something has been disproven, and we're supposed to believe it. Of course, it's all a big joke. Nobody takes Wikipedia seriously anymore. When I read from a Wikipedia article, it's not because I believe everything Wikipedia says. That's why I said, when I was reading from it before, I was like, just to preface it all, I said, guys, Wikipedia, I know, all right? I know. Now just let me read this, right? Because you can usually tell, if you're reading a Wikipedia article, there's certain topics that they're just going to make stuff up and feed you completely false information. But there's other topics that the topics are literally just maintained by the most autistic people in the world, and everything is just 100% correct. So you get to the point where you can discern and you can figure out what's right and what's wrong. And that brings me to probably the last point that I should make in this video, which is goes back to the first guy. Whose brain was just like a mess of different ideas. Something that I've seen a lot in the past, especially with young men, but young women as well, you can get to the point where you're so traumatized by learning that everything that you were taught, no, not everything, learning that almost everything you were taught in the past, your parents, your public school, all the things they taught you about history, about how to interpret history, medicine and nutrition, all the authorities we were supposed to trust, and have proven themselves untrustworthy and corrupt. You get so traumatized by that you then go and distrust everything from an authority, even if it's obviously true, and that makes you really susceptible, really gullible to believe whatever psyop conspiracy theory the CIA puts out there. That's partly why we have so many Q-tard, boomer, QAnon, whatever they're called, that are constantly saying 2 more weeks, which is just the same as Operation Trust from the Soviet Union. We have so many people who are into flat earth and urine drinking. We have there's some people who are followers of my YouTube channel who are going to be really triggered that I just basically said that I don't believe in urine drinking and flat earth, and they're going to start leaving schizo comments about NASA photos and stuff like that below the video. That's okay. I've seen it all before. But anyways, you get this whole, I think this is on purpose, you get this whole modern wave of young people who are so disillusioned they're actually traumatized by realizing how much everyone lied to them. But then instead of developing critical thinking abilities and being actually able to discern what's probably true or not, which I agree is a monumental task, they simply reject everything from an authority. And that results in them going from most of what I know and believe is wrong to most of what I know and believe is wrong, but in a different way. Anyways, thanks everyone for watching my video, which is not really a video. Thanks everyone for listening to my video, and make sure you check out returntotheland.org and any other links you might see below the video here. Have a great day. Oh yeah, and please leave extremely controversial and offensive comments, especially the first guy that I responded to his comment. Please leave an angry comment. Anyone who's offended or triggered by anything I said in this video, just leave the angriest comment you can, or unsubscribe. Or subscribe. Oh yeah, and make sure you subscribe and hit the like button. That's all. That's all, folks.